In this movie, I will introduce the HIPAA Authorizer. The HIPAA Authorizer services the EDI 278 transactions. 278 is also called Authorization and Review Request. Typically, this is a transaction that happens between a provider who wants to do a certain procedure and a carrier who has to decide if this procedure is within the scope of the insurance policy. If so, the carrier will issue an authorization number and the provider has ensured that they get paid. Let's start with the installation and setup of the product. At this point, I assume that you have filled out your personal information and downloaded the file. I downloaded the 64-bit file. I have a 64-bit computer. So now I double-click on this file, and I see there are two files in there, a setup executable and an authorizer setup. MSI stands for Microsoft Installer. It is important you run setup first. It will make sure that the necessary Windows components, like .NET frameworks, are installed and up to date. So I click on setup and all the requirements were fulfilled, and the installer package starts. This asks us if we want to install the program. We click on next, have to agree for the trial license, click on next. Here we have a choice to install the program for everyone. That's what we want to do. And I click on next to do the installation. After the installation is finished, the authorizer will launch by default. This is the HIPAA Authorizer. The main interface shows there are basically two modes to run this. One is to request an authorization, the other is to give authorization. The two complementary functions of the 278 are included in this product. To set up the authorizer, click on Setup, then Application Setup. In here, we set the directory where we write the response files. In here, we decide what we want to do with processed response files to prevent processing them again. And if we want to keep a log of everything. How to deal with updates. The document color on screen and on paper, if it should be red to highlight it. These are the application setups. We click on Save and we are done. The next piece of setup is the company setup. Company is who you are. So if you are a provider and try to create authorizations, this would probably be a doctor's office or a hospital, and we put information in here about how you identify yourself in EDI files. Click on Save and save your company setup. Now, set up Edit mode. Request and response transactions are linked to each other through a trace assigning identity, TRN, or transaction number. It has to be unique, and it is important to link the response later on with the request. If you are connected to a database, this will store every previously input requester, subscriber, or provider. It can then be recalled by the first few letters, vastly increasing the ease of data entry. Here, we turn on the autocomplete for IDs and names. Here, we make sure that the requests that we send out are tested for HIPAA compliance after being saved. This makes sure that the trading partners will accept our authorization requests. This last setup is the delimiter setup for EDI files. We don't have to take care of this, it's more for EDI specialists, and the default values work fine. The setup is now done. This concludes setup without database support. We can now load a request or create a new request by manually entering information. I will now create a request. This will be a quick authorization request. The first tab is the requester. Entity type is the provider. We use the NPI and type in a 10-digit number, make up an address, and contact information. This is the patient event level. We want a specialty care review, initial verification. This should be enough, and we have created a new request. The file is created, and we can edit it in the EDI editor. We go into Give Authorization mode, and we have the same transaction and can start a response. I will adjudicate the request, save it, and close it. Now I can create the response file and open it in EDI editor. Here we see the authorization EDI file where the purpose code indicates that this is a request. This concludes the tutorial.